Welcome to Hope Looks Up Bible Study, led by Dr. Tom Haney on Tuesday, July 2nd, 2024. The Hope Looks Up ministry mission is to form a ministry geared to give hope, encourage, educate, uplift, and point people to Jesus Christ for life direction.
Amen.
My name is Chuck Eaton. I'm pleased to host the Hope Looks Up Bible Study. We accomplish our mission by conducting Bible studies in person and on YouTube. We prepare complete notes at the end of each lesson. And if you need more information on the Hope Looks Up Ministries, please go to our website, hopelooksup.org. Today we continue with our 9-week study series titled, God's Call to America and God's Answers. This is the 5th lesson, and it's titled, Demeaning and Faithful and the Fatherland. Demeaning the Faithful and the Fatherland. We're glad you joined us today. There are 2 parts to our study, teaching and prayer time. Prayer time follows teaching and is optional and available to those who have prayer needs. If you have questions or prayer requests, please fill out one of the forms on your table and we'll pick them up after the teaching. We will now begin with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, it is such a privilege to join together to study your word. We are fortunate to have our teacher, Chaplain Haney, to lead us in this study. Bless him as he prepares and delivers this study series, God's Call to America. Bless our participants both in person and on YouTube, and may we apply what we learn and share with the hope we have with others. Amen.
Well, thank you, Chuck, and it's so good to greet each one of you this warm afternoon. There's not anything else to have in Phoenix, is there, on July, except to have warm afternoons. I want to continue to look at what the counterculture people have had as an ongoing cultural battle. And to change the values and morals of America, the counterculture has set as a target Christianity, because basically Christian values and virtues become the basis of many of our laws. You might say to some extent the 10 Commandments, kind of written out in another form, kind of form a lot of our bylaws and our constitutional laws. And also it has set as a target the United States and our traditions that we have. So I want to kind of look at that, especially today, as we look at the failure of American counterculturists and their attack on faith, and the fact that they say it serves a very unintelligent and backwards minority of the people and the nation. Now, I want to share some things with you that might be a little surprising, and maybe they aren't, but they were a little surprising to me as I put these facts together. It's surprising that our counterculture people would attack Christianity as much as it do, when surveys as recent as 3 years ago shows that a majority of Americans believe, 1, there is a personal God. That was very encouraging to me. 2, their prayers do get answered. And that 3, faith and religion is fairly important in their life. Less than 10% of all Americans surveyed answered yes. That describes me when surveyors ask, would you describe yourself as totally non-religious, not belonging to a church, not attending a church, and not having any religious affiliation? This is in stark contrast to the surveys done about the entertainment media, the news media, and university officials and other leaders of the counterculture movement. They show that over 60% of these people in these categories claim no religious affiliation at all. That's quite a change from 10%, isn't it? This number increases by 15% for all of those in these categories where people are under 40 years of age. The most interesting item in these surveys to me was the difference on whether there is too little religious influence in America. 51% of regular Americans said yes, there is too little religious influence in America, and only 2% of the counterculture leaders said there was too little religious influence in America. Perhaps the most telling question of the survey was, what was the greatest objective in life? And over 50% checked one of those, and primarily their first one, have a closer relationship to God as their top priority. In the light of such figures, The persistent hostility to religious values by those in the counterculturalist movement are not only peculiar, they're positively demeaning. They're basically writing off half of the United States. Rather than readjusting their view of reality in order to come to terms with the religious feeling in America, most of those in the counterculture movement simply chose to ignore the surveys and what they told them. They retreat even deeper into their precious and sealed off world. For academia, that's their ivory towers where most of their compliments and stroking come from each other. In Hollywood, that has to do with the Malibu beaches where the attention is really not too much on religion ever. Or the high rises of New York and Washington, D.C., where most of the news media hang out and discuss things with one another. They continue to write off religious believers as so many slope-browed bumpkins who get their clothes from Kmart and their ideas from Fox News. A few of the best informed believe that they are maybe vaguely aware of the research, but even those who know the studies stubbornly refuse to believe them. They often cite the fact that they know no one who regularly goes to church. Well, isn't that interesting? They run around with each other and they don't go to church, so no one they know goes to church or synagogue. So they assume that no one does. The answer, of course, is that their range of acquaintance is radically unrepresentative of the American population. The only committed Christians they ever see are the evangelists that occasionally appear on a television program they might watch. The blind spot towards religion also reflects the fact that so many people who shape our popular culture have personally rejected the established institutions of organized faith. The previously cited survey of key executives in media and entertainment media and university situations show that in television, executives indicate that even though 93% of them said they received religious upbringing, only 7% currently describe themselves as regular participants in church or synagogue services. It's as if they have outgrown the religious conventions of their own childhood, and they naturally expect that the rest of the country will follow their admirable example. Grow up and get out of church. In terms of its religious dimensions, as in so many others, the vision of reality that appears in our entertainment, our news media, and our university teaching is a world that they have created in their own image. The reports are in, and many of these counterculture positions have regularly said they believe 5% of Americans go to church or synagogue on a weekend. We are now told that even 6% go to church in England. So the idea that only 5% go here, it's as though they're translating European church attendance into kind of what must happen here in the United States as well. The reports are in, and it says that they do not feel that there's a large enough percentage to worry about or listen to. Movies and TV shows have long had productions that insist on erasing even the most rudimentary religious feelings that the characters can create. And I think sometimes we as Christians miss this. But when we begin to see situations in which faith, prayer, a pastor, religious attendance should be happening, and it's not happening, we can begin to see how it is being phased out as just non-existent in our world. It just doesn't happen in the United States. Hollywood unleashed the three big budget melodramas. This has been several years ago. One season, Dying Young, starring Julia Roberts. Some of you may have seen some of these. The Doctor, starring William Hurt, and Regarding Henry, starring Harrison Ford. In all three films, the stars face long illnesses, dire illnesses, long hospitalizations in the throes of life and death health battles. At no point in any of those three films, and the main characters or any of their friends or family turn even one moment to a prayer or the power of prayer. No one asks to see a member of the clergy or even the hospital chaplain that is there, or in any way invoke the name of God into their life and death struggle. We know that the number of atheists go down in foxholes, but we also know that the number of atheists goes down on operating tables too. And it's interesting, the movies refuse to show religious reflection on the part of any of these vulnerable people in these films as they're dying. It was fundamentally unrealistic. It's no longer a film retelling life. It's propaganda for the counterculture movement. It's really an effort to eliminate religion and faith from the community. Even the sweet and folksy film Doc Holliday, and I don't know if you remember that. We saw it, we loved it, we just enjoyed that show all to bits. I just want to show you how subtle it works itself in. It was set in an idyllic little town in South Carolina. And if you'll remember, he was on his way to a glamorous doctoral internship and then later position in Los Angeles. Scar ran into a lot of trouble, and so he ends up in this little town in South Carolina, and they actually woo him with their charm. He decides to go to his dreams of glitz and glory in Los Angeles, settle in this new little town, be their doctor. It had an interesting caveat. In many ways, it could be any small town in South Carolina, with one big exception. There's no church in town, and no one ever goes to church. My point is this: can you name any town in South Carolina with a shopping area, a library, an empty doctor's office, a hospital without a doctor, and city officers that does not have at least one church? Of course not. It's absolutely unreasonable. It's as though church just gets eliminated out of even the cutest and the most funny and best of all the movies. Even the film and television shows that reflect religion in a more positive light usually put them in a setting that does not relate to ordinary urban life for today. It may be England in the 1920s. We all enjoyed Chariots of Fire, great show about a young Presbyterian missionary who ran but would not run on a Sunday and therefore did not get the Olympic gold medal. But it was set in the 1920s. Or Tender Mercies, which was written by a Christian author, set in a small dusty town in Texas. And if you watched the movie, it seemed more like 1930s than 1950s. It was kind of that old-fashioned religion feel. Even Horton Foote, about the life of a godly woman, Geraldine Page, was set in rural Texas in the 1950s. In these nostalgic affirmations of that old-time religion, the church is sufficiently distant from the daily life that most of us lead that represents no threat to the militant secularism that the movie industry embraces so enthusiastically. Religion always remains reassuringly irrelevant to today. It's old-fashioned. It might have worked in another generation. It might have been it, but it is not what we need for right now. We're all familiar with popular music's fascination with satanic symbols that have adorned their recordings both in picture and in word. Frequent emphasis on the dark side has included a lot of things. It is as symbols, and those symbols have included Satan satanic themes, pentagrams, severed goat heads, and other satanic symbols, not only on the pictures on their albums and their CDs, and now on even sometimes their posters that advertise their concerts, but also in the words. And even if they were doing this for publicity or to sell their music, as some of them have so aptly said to answer why they do that, the frequent emphasis on the dark side and its symbols, no matter how shallow and self-serving, bears witness to the estrangement of the mainstream music business and conventional religious values. God's influence is all but invisible on American television. Now, I realize that we did, Mike Hart's Abishola did show a few religious church scenes, but did you notice they were set in a Nigerian setting, which once again, most of us wouldn't necessarily relate to, but it had all of the cultural things of the Nigerian community that were involved in even when they showed the church services. Well, Lloyd Billingsley, a TV screenwriter of about 40 years ago, observed in Christianity Today. He wrote, "I cannot remember any episode of any show where a character is religiously motivated to do or not to do some important act. Nobody has ever said, God's called me to do this, or God wants me to do this, or I feel God doesn't want me to participate in that." That's amazing, isn't it? Once again, it's not life. In the unwritten constitution of television, he said, the separation of church and screen is strictly adhered to. I thought that was a great line. The separation of church and screen. And as you look at it, it's really true. Even in family programs, God is effectively written out of existence, except the constant phrases like, oh my God, or OMG, or just, as though that form of swearing is not blasphemy if you're not saying JD or GD or some of the other phrases. And the Judeo-Christian values on such things as adultery and divorce are disregarded and ignored in almost every television program. Those are just out the window. In a 1992 study by Northwestern University, Dayton University, and the Duke University Medical Center, they evaluated more than 400 productions of the 4 major networks for religious content and images. And you might say, well, wait a minute, Dr. Haney, why don't you have something more recent? More recent, nobody even takes these surveys. And the percentages have dropped even worse than what you'll read in the percentages that were being done in the 80s, 90s, and the teens. They concluded that only 5.4% of the characters on television had an identifiable religious affiliation, although 50% of Americans claimed some affiliation with organized faith. In summing up their report, these researchers said, television's treatment of religion tends to be the best characterized as abuse through neglect. The distortions and insults about faith and organized religion will continue unabated as long as the counterculture movement continues in its overall campaign against judgment and values. As long as they believe that there is somebody pronouncing judgment on the things they want to do, or the decisions they've made, or the values that they have now established as the right values, there will continue to be this constant war between them. A war against standards leads logically and inevitability to hostility to faith and religion, because it is this Christian faith or religious faith that provides the ultimate basis for all standards. The God of the Bible is not a moral relationist. He is most definitely judgmental. The very nature of the Judeo-Christian God is a Lord who makes distinctions. In the book of Genesis, just some simple ones. God creates the world by dividing the light from the darkness, divided the water above from the water beneath, divided the water from the dry land, and so on. In a traditional Jewish home, they say farewell to the Sabbath every Saturday night and divide the holy day that just passed from the more ordinary week ahead, reciting a blessing that praises God for distinctions. To the extent that we, as human beings, feel that we were created in God's image and that we're fundamentally different from all the animals, we make distinctions too, and we have standards. This is the position that is honored by millions upon millions of our fellow citizens in America, but it's regularly ridiculed in the mass media and academic circles. It's a strong part of the countercultural war on the values and traditions of America. So what is the call of God to America about the demeaning of faith and the faithful? What are his answers? Well, I feel the call of God to America is this. Christians, I think God is saying, stand with your faith and depend the truths of the Bible. Popular or not, they are right, and the way God intended people to live. To those who would seek to remove all Judeo-Christian influences in America, I think God is saying, you cannot escape the results of the choices you're making. You will reap what you're sowing. Jesus was very clear in John 15 when he spoke about the animosity that would always be present between those who believe and those who do not. Now, the passage in my Bible said disciples and the world. But that's what we're talking about, believers and non-believers. The disciples are the believers, the world are the non-believers. He said, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I've chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Remember what I've told you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obey my teaching, they will obey yours also. Jesus clearly taught that the animosity between believers and those who live without faith, here called the world, have animosity because they don't believe the same things. if they would have listened to God, then they would listen to you. But since they're unwilling to listen to God, they will not listen to Christians. They will not listen to believers. That's what Jesus says. If they hate me, they hate you. If they wouldn't listen to me, they won't listen to you. If they wouldn't listen to God, they won't listen to me or you. You cannot compromise your beliefs to span the gulf between you and the non-believer, because they will not make small steps towards your compromise. They just see your compromise as you finally being rational, opening your eyes and seeing how life really operates. Titus 1:9 tells us, we must hold firmly to the trustworthy message as it has been taught, so that we can encourage others by sound doctrine and refute to those who oppose it. But Jesus also said in this passage some clear teaching for those who would not accept the teaching that he offered. Here's what he said. They will treat you this way because of my name, for they do not know the one who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not be guilty of sin. But now they have no excuse for their sin. Whoever hates me hates my Father. Public. When Ronald Reagan coined the phrase evil empire, he was referring to the Soviet Union. And I basically agreed with him that the USSR needed to be contained and checkmated. But today it is the US that is widely perceived as an evil empire, and world forces are gathering to stop us. Many American counterculture promoters, including tenured professors, proudly volunteer to join that international anti-American effort. And we have seen it firsthand this year in our school systems, as we have seen universities closed, graduations canceled, classes called off, simply because a large group of Muslim students and protesters are angered by the United States position of supporting Israel. Now you say, yeah, but that's over at ASU. Let me tell you, Friday night, Sharon and I drove to the ball game. We go down 7th Street, and as we got to Camelback and 7th Street, in the Walgreens parking lot was probably 200 or 300 demonstrators with large Muslim flags on each of the other three corners. It's right among us. We live with that idea that somehow pressure and demonstrations will cause our country to quit doing the things that most of us with Judeo-Christian heritage believe we should be doing. Viewing America as a threat to world peace and a menace to the security and prosperity of other nations, many of them reject traditional notions of patriotism. Robert Jensen, a professor since 1992 in journalism at the University of Texas, said in his book, Citizens of the Empire, the struggle to claim our humanity boldly asserted, it is time to scrap patriotism. More specifically, it is crucial to scrap patriotism in today's empire, the United States, where patriotism is not only a bad idea, but literally a threat to the survival of the planet. The strongest, most direct evidence against the indictment of America as a destructive imperial power comes from the consideration of the progress of those nations most closely involved with the United States. But that has not stopped the counterculturists from declaring what an awful nation we are, and that most of our heroes were not heroes, but usually were the villains in the conflicts. Oliver Stone, the two-time Oscar winner and accepting the Torch of Liberty Award from the American Civil Liberties Union, 1987, said, our own country has become a military-industrial monolith dedicated to the Cold War, in many ways as rigid and as corrupt as the top of our rivals, the Soviets. We have become the enemy, with a security state now second to none. Today we have come to live in total hatred, fear, and a desire to destroy. Bravo! Fear and conformity have triumphed. The members of the military by no means stand alone as the targets of contempt for those who embrace countercultural ideas. It exceeds to the demeaning of the faithful, as we've taken a look at earlier. It also includes the American businessman, who has now become the easy puppet for counterculturists to despise. The counterculture has often linked capitalism with criminality. and pictured the American business person I consider the backbone of our nation as the vilest and most corrupt of all people. We will not even have to prove the way they have maligned police. All you had to do was just listen to the judicial report that came about the Phoenix police the last 2 days on television, even in television programs that are normally considered fairly liberal, just to read and show the picture of the demonstration that went on after a speech here a few years ago, and talking about it was totally provoked by the police, as the film is showing demonstrators throwing cans of gas and bottles and rocks and other things at the police. So we don't have to talk much about that. We know that counterculturalists have maligned our police in almost every city area, and shown the only police heroes, even on television, are those who operate out of the system. They're all mavericks. They are disrespectful of their bosses. They refuse to accept authority. They are anti-system heroes. The countercultural view of our religious, military, business, and law enforcement institutions coincides with their overall vision of America as a society that is cruel, corrupt, and hopelessly unjust. Well, the call to America, I feel, is to be thankful for all that America has provided and the opportunities it's given to you and me. You know, I grew up in poverty, and the Lord has certainly taken that off of me and given me and our families a very wonderful life. Thank you for joining us on Hope Looks Up. May God give you, each of you, a fantastic week. Chuck?
Well, thank you, Tom, for another great message. It just makes me think we live in such a wonderful country. You look around the world and all the troubles in the other countries and the ways other people have to live with the leaders that they have. And I know our country is not doing as well as it once did, but you know, God blesses those that are put the Lord at first in their lives, and when we choose not to do that, our country will cease to exist the way we've known it. So we need to keep plugging away and trying to convince others that God is the only way. Okay, well, that concludes the teaching part of our lesson, and now we'll turn the meeting over